Everyone. Thank you for having me. And this is my first time seeing so many of you in the sector. I am not solely a settlement service practitioner, and then maybe I'm less known to the crowd. So I'm glad to have the opportunity. Just briefly about my agency. My agency is a multi-service agency, primarily focusing on multiple vulnerabilities, including mental health, family trauma, history of persecution, poverty, a lot of advocacy work. And on top of that, we have newcomer settlement services, disabilities, and special needs services. And it so happened that my research background has a lot to do with access equity for those with invisible vulnerabilities, including the communicative disabilities, mental health disabilities, as well as those, to do with learning disability, developmental issues, and history of trauma, persecution, trafficking, and mental health disorders. And therefore, I think that's why I'm here today to have spent a few minutes with you. So with that, I'm trying to pretend to be technical and share my screen. And if everyone, and I would rather stay on this screen if that's okay with everyone. Can you all see my screen? And obviously now I cannot see you.
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. So we're talking about intersectionality today, which is the pie in the sky thing, right? And at the end, we will, sum up how challenging it is and how pie in the sky this idea is, just to be realistic in setting out the expectations. And I don't need to preach to the choir. All of us who are, all of you actually who spend your minutes every day serving frontline, needs would understand it much more so than I do. I'm trying to bring an overall aspect of where all of these problems come together and create the perfect storm, and how, if any way, we can strategize to make this situation better. And then I don't need to tell anyone about the fact that there is some anti-oppression and anti-racism definitions, and where, immigrants and refugees and racialized communities are most affected by this. And then it does not only include racism and color of your skin, but also your status of residency, be it an immigrant, a refugee claimant. Those are precarious status, those who come in through pathways with different names. The pathways could be humanitarian and compassion. The pathway could be economic, but in reality, if it quacks like a duck, it walks like a duck, it looks like a duck, it is a duck, right? So my hometown is Hong Kong, and there is, for all of you working in frontline, that there is a Hong Kong pathway. It is not a lot of blood and gore as it is in Ukraine, but there is a lot of HNC components to it, and whereby people are here on work permits and study permits. It's called an economic pathway when their needs are also HNC, right? So discrimination, oppression, and needs that are unmet reside in and originate from all of these components of society, and all of these different types of people with their individual labels, and their labels could be right, it could be wrong, it could be just partially reflective of their actual needs. And when we're talking about oppression or discrimination, we need to think about it in at four levels, right? Ideologically, do you actually grow up listening to parents and grandparents, preach to you about what is true about a group of people, right? When I was doing one of my grad programs in the southern part of the United States, and I had my white colleagues tell me, why can't I use the word Black? That's what we've been using for generations and generations. It doesn't necessarily mean that I don't like them, but it is the color Black, right? So that's ideological. I'm not talking about judgment here. I'm just describing the phenomenon. And the second part has more to do, the number 2 and number 3 has the most to do with what I'm talking about today, the interpersonal oppression, right? Whether it is explicit outright aggression or microaggression, whether it is intentional or things you do that you don't know about, right? Such as if I were to use the N word here, or even the BLACK word that I just used a few minutes ago, it could have offended people who are not interpreting the fact that I'm using the term clinically, academically, and from a scientific angle, right? So they could have perceived it as microaggression or intentional aggression. It goes into it. It's something that could be happening any minute. It could be happening when you are designing your policies, when you are deciding on funding formula, and when you are deciding on how to hire someone, how to ask someone interview questions, how to decide on the pay scale of what this person needs, or making a decision of whether to accommodate that person, or when you are conducting frontline services or therapy, making assumptions of what this person's background would be about, their knowledge, their rights, and their family makeup, right? So that's all interpersonal oppression that could be happening every day with it, every ounce of speech and every action we take, or every way we think or not think, or words we don't use, or actions we not do. So you could be doomed doing or not doing, talking or not talking, thinking or not thinking. So we need to get our ideology straight so that your problems doesn't come out from the interpersonal as interpersonal oppression because we're not saying things right or thinking of things right or acting right at the right time in the face of the right people. And institutional oppression is also something that we will cover a lot today. How the system acts towards a group of people, right? Do we assume everyone needs the same matter of healthcare? Do we assume everyone understands the very complex process of who to get what vaccine first and how many days? And do we assume how they can actually access information online, understand all of those English, and book their appointments online? Do we assume that everybody trusts authorities such as the police? Do we assume that women had their rights to childbirth or none, right? Do we assume everyone had the right to education like, most of us do in front of the screen and therefore be able to understand and act accordingly? Do we assume everyone had the right mind or the sound mind or the wherewithal to keep their IDs straight and up to date and therefore not fall into precarious status, after a few years, right? Do we assume when we say, I'll see you next time, safe drive home, there is a drive home, there is a home, and there is support at home when our clients go home, or if there is a home, right? And internalized is when someone hates themselves for being themselves, right? It could be gender identity, it could be racial, or it could be disabilities or the lack thereof. It could be, from the experience of traumatic history. It's just self-identity coupled with, it could be innate, and the self-identity and whatever contextual history that is thrown upon this person throughout the course of their life. So all of these are different levels of oppression that can, and indeed are happening every minute as we see now. So when there is ideological oppression, what I commit all the time is ableism. How come you don't understand what I mean? I've said it 7 times already. What part of it didn't you understand? I've spoken in 4 languages to you. What part of it didn't you understand, right? So that's my crime, so to say, of ableism. I believe that, if people read it, they'll remember. If people read it, they'll understand, and believe it or not believing in it, they'll still comply, because you're part of the system, you're part of the taxpayers that need to be abide by this law, or you're part of this employment regime where whether you buy into the policies or not, you have to comply. Right. So there may be barriers that are acting against or prohibiting them from first understanding and then first receiving the information and then understanding the information and then applying the information and acting out the consequences. Right. So every step of those ways, they could have been barriered, and therefore my assumptions are not correct. So, when I transitioned from the business communication or professional, academic, or journalistic communication profession into clinical communication profession, that's when my eyes opened to see, well, like if you write it a certain journalistic way, you're excluding a lot from being able to get your messaging, right? If you're talking politics or you're talking finance and stocks, it may be very different than from when you're actually disseminating very critical and basic knowledge of public health measures, such as when we were in COVID, people keep saying it's grade 4 or grade 6 English that the government is putting out. Was it really? A lot of my clients were not able to read it. It could be their age, it could be their language barrier, but it could also be the intellectual capacity. And then when there is such disability justice, right? And then that goes into not only neurodiversity or visible and invisible disabilities, it goes into all of those vulnerabilities as well, right? History of being, history of having addictions, history of being persecuted, history of having trauma from socio-political oppression or family oppression, history of not being safe, history of having emotional disorders or mental health issues, mental health breakdowns, all of that. All of those vulnerabilities plus, or, coupled with a concurrent together with any other type of, racialized disadvantages, poverty, and precarious status or newcomer status, not having full understanding of the system. This is what makes others label them as, you're so dumb. Remember, when it's beyond my parents' generation, the deaf population was labeled the deaf and the dumb, right? So the fact that they couldn't speak, they were labeled dumb, right? The fact that some people could not control their behaviors, such as the autistic population, they would be called deviant, right? Certain people with deep depressions, profound depression, depressive disorders, not being able to engage in social context or retain or maintain attention span and keep a job, those were or are still labeled unproductive, right? And therefore, they become, quote unquote, financial burden of taxpayers in society and to government, and they should be, quote unquote, disposable, and therefore their opinions are invalid. Is that really true? Or are their barriers and disadvantages not irreversible? Most of them are reversible, and then in most cases we are able to turn them into contributing citizens somehow with whatever aspects, so that they can contribute to society as well and contribute to our GDP and be understood, and also shed light onto the system as to how to make it better. Right? When we are saying we can, but they can't, let's help them. Please be mindful of the fact that there is a lot that we cannot do. You may think, oh, I'm the ED of an organization and I have a doctorate under my belt, I must be part of the we. Actually, I am not. I have a learning disability called the dyscalculia. I cannot handle numbers, right? So as much as we are all the individual I's, us, me, and we're all the individual we's and us, there are very many blind spots and gaps that we can produce or cannot produce or could not help with GDP ourselves. So maybe those are the gaps that someone else can pick up if we're working within the same sector, and don't underestimate the power of those who we think are unproductive, disposable, or invalid. Right? So if we're talking about interpersonal oppression, as we talked about, when we think about what we can or cannot do versus what they can or cannot do, that's interpersonal oppression, right? So classic examples, if we're working in the immigrant settlement sector, would be, people abusing others who are unfamiliar with the system or with multiple complex combination of vulnerabilities, right? Think about the husband who is sponsoring the wife who doesn't know English or French, who is dependent on their sponsorship to stay in Canada and is dependent on the husband for shelter and access to her kids, right? So if the husband is abusive, which is essentially what our agency does night and day, the Classic example, wife would have no access to friends, no access to religious worship opportunities, no access to phone, no access to internet, no access to laptop, no access to finance, and controlled access to children or their dependents or pets, because you need to comply, you need to behave. If you do not do according to what I want you to do or not, I take away certain controlled privileges. Those are privileges, right? Such as, oh, you're not going to share this house, I'm going to kick you out, or you're not going to have access to the baby, or I'm not going to pay for the baby's food, and therefore you take the baby away, right? Or I'm going to, disconnect, terminate the residency sponsorship, and you go back where you came from, right? And a lot of this, when it's going into scam cases and fraudulent cases, it becomes human trafficking, right? It could be the boyfriend or the employer sponsoring someone for a job or a marriage, but when in fact, it becomes intimate partner violence when the boyfriend sells the girl into traits, right? One after the other, for, back pages and, sexual exploitation, human trafficking, sex trafficking, right? Where employers, especially when their home country is undergoing a lot of turmoil, Ukraine, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, whatever, Burma, right? Oh, I can give you a job and come here, and then therefore you have a work permit and you apply for PR, blah, 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 blah. And then when they get here, the milder cases would be you are shipped from one workplace to another, you're given accommodation and transport, but you're always going from accommodation to work to accommodation to work. And you don't know where you're working. Yes, you're working some legal job, but your pay may not be legal. You may not be accessible to legal protection and labor rights under the law because you may or may not be documented individuals, right? Of course, when that gets worse, it goes from labor trafficking into sex trafficking, right? And if you're more vulnerable, such as you're dependent on them for drugs or money, you fell into a financial scam where you quote unquote owe them a lot, then you will be pressured into criminal activities as well, right? So a lot of these people or this population is overrepresented in the legal system because of their vulnerabilities and barriers, and therefore, a lot of the ideological stereotypes of a lot of the newcomers, because of poverty or whatever, they don't want to abide by the law, and they get into crimes and those underground casino rings or drug trades or counterfeit this, that, the other. Yes, I'm sure there are significant numbers of those, but I'm also sure not every one of them were intentional or indeed premeditated to plan to commit those crimes, right? So all of these vulnerabilities that we know about, we see at the front line. If you probe further, right, when your client says, I want housing, can you help me with an application? Or I can't pay rent, or I just lost a job, can you help me with EI or OW, right? Probe further, ask more, use more of your motivational interviewing skills to probe further. Are they looking for housing because of a safety issue? Are they looking for OW because their child is already starving or someone's getting beaten up night and day, right? So there's more that you need to involve than the CIS, the legal system, community legal clinic, financial support, all of that we have to worry about. But to know what wraparound services your client needs, you actually need to know all of their social determinants of health, right? So there's income and social status, whether they have secure employment that is meaningful and gainful to be able to feed them and not just working poor, right? And employment and conditions, education and literacy. All of the 1 and 2 and 3 are very intertwined, right? If you don't have enough of 1 or 3, then you don't have enough of 2, and there you don't have enough of 1. Right? And other baggages that is not known when they first come with a presenting issue of, can you help me with housing? Or can you help me with EI, right? Is their childhood experiences, physical environments where they work, the social supports and coping skills that they have, right? If they were traumatized or abused as a child and their understanding of the world is very limited, or they undervalue themselves for their rights, they are not going to speak up, or when they speak up, they fear consequences, and therefore they bear that grudge with them for the whole life. And here I'm going to just spend 2 minutes of your time. Hopefully I don't trigger anyone, but I am a survivor of child abuse. So, I have evidence of fracture on my skull, and broken cartilages on my ears, and a lot of the tongue was lacerated because of multiple slaps, and my nose had to have surgery because of a crooked sinus, right? A lot of those, and I would even develop a mechanism to wake myself up at night from nightmares of being chased after, or being beaten up, or being locked up, or blah blah blah. All of those are from my both biological parents. So, and mind you, it has nothing to do with educational literacy. They are higher up ranking in the education industry. One's a high school teacher, one's a minister, or an inspector of health back home. And, for the longest time, even up to, I think, in excess of 30 years old, I have all these flashbacks. And then when I, see people being treated unfairly, or children misbehaving and parents letting them run amok and get away with murder, it just lights me up so bad, and I would act up and I would be angry. How are you deserving this? Like, really naughty child, like, this is a naughty child, you shouldn't deserve that level of freedom. Or why did you pick to let this child go to university and not the other one? Why did you make this child plow the driveway for you but not the other one? Why is this one getting beaten up and not the other one? Why is this one getting away with murder when that one's getting physically disciplined, right? I think till this day this affects me. And when I participate in tables such as family safety, childhood, CAS, social support, physical environments at home, right? I think about all these police going in and then talking about taking the child away, when the teachers find out, right? What they don't know is there is one day, which is probably very soon, that this child would go back to the same home, and then at that point, you truly believe the parents behave, they probably have developed a better mechanism to abuse this child, but not being caught, right? So I remember I used to live in old apartment buildings back home, and then on the other side of the apartment buildings, I could hear people talk. These are all concrete buildings, mind you, so it's not flimsy cardboard where I could hear people talk. But next door would be across the window, I would hear a child who's a boy, and he would scream his head out and cry every night, and I would hear canes hitting him, and then some adults telling him to kneel down, right? So I felt really bad for this child, and that at that point it's probably a lot of transference of my own emotions too. So I watched TVs, and of course there was some PSA sometimes, if you suspect child abuse, call this number. So I copied down that number, and one day my dad found out, because nobody writes as bad as I do. I have really bad handwriting. And then he just literally whipped me the whole night, saying, I'm just gonna, take him to the police and have him jailed, snitch at him, blah, blah, blah. How dare I, right? So at this, if you are not educated right, if you don't have the right or persevering enough kind of mindset, would make you bring your trauma to your grave, basically. Oh, I should not, whatever happens to my family, I should not tell anyone. Whatever my suffering is, if I voice out about it, I would suffer more, right? And that essentially is the case for a lot of these women, or abused seniors, or abused children and youth, right? And then it could be not only at the family level, it could be at the society level, where they would be voicing their concerns, and lo and behold, you're met with pepper spray or rubber bullets or water tanks or even real firing tanks, right? We've seen that in different parts of the world, and I've seen that certainly in my home country, or hometown, Hong Kong, who later was taken back from China. And these things certainly did happen in China that we know as it stands now. So they could be oppressed as an individual in the family by the people who are supposed to be loving them and nurturing them growing up. They could be oppressed by their society, where it makes them no longer trust the police, no longer trust the reporting system, children's aid system, subsidy system, court system, health system, right? Because they snitched at them. They, turned on the phones for the police and showed them evidence that they participated in protests, and therefore they were thrown in jail for exercising their human rights or freedom of speech, right? So when you're asking people to, well, why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you voice out? Why didn't you advocate for yourself? Be mindful. That's also ableism. We do not know what consequences that they would have faced in that particular social context had they really have done more, or had they done less, right? So 4, 5, 6 are very intertwined, and we need to know a lot of trauma. And I'm so sorry I did all that, and I'm gonna step back from that traumatic experience and hopefully close to trigger if there was anything that I did to trigger anyone. I apologize in advance. And then talking about physical health, right? Healthy behaviors, do they understand healthy behaviors, right? From their hometowns, was their education about what is good behavior? Was smoking and vaping still an in or cool phenomenon, right? And was addictions okay? Mind you, a lot of people coming into our ground would think cannabis is not okay, right? And they need to understand our laws now and respect those who choose to use it for leisure or clinical needs, right? And then COVID told us a lot about healthy behaviors and access to health. I happen to have resided in Central East Lynn, and my agency has operated in Central East Lynn for over 30 years now. And sitting on those tables, and of course it's no longer called the Central East Lynn. Essentially, there is still a geographical boundary that the Ministry of Health operates out of. And therefore they publish user stats based on those boundaries. And it tells us Central East Lynn, Scarborough, Morningside, North Scarborough, East Scarborough, from a bit up north from downtown on the east side, right? We know that that's probably one of the most, if most, diverse communities of Canada, and also the most the highest number of human trafficking spas and crime activities in Canada reported by the police, and also a high number of language barrier, high number of poverty, high number of low literacy. And therefore, what it tells us is, west of 404 is the Yonge and Finch station, a North York community, right? A lot of newcomers are there too, but those are probably the more literate, and they go take the subway downtown, financial district, IT jobs, single unit family or lonely one person newcomer, right? And and east of 404 is the family side of immigrants. A lot of older people, a lot of people with language barriers, and therefore they gather around, places with a lot of support of their or services available in their own languages, right? So we can't put the one size fit all policy ideal into serving different communities. And Scarborough was one of the first that got hit rampant by COVID, and therefore it was one of the first that the government dedicated resources to open up vaccines for, right? So there's a reason. It's not that people are not reading. They don't know where to access such information. And when there's such information, it takes a while for it to be rolled out in different languages. And even when there's okay, I was part of the vaccine rollout tables. Okay, we all did different languages, but they were all rolled out the same way. Hello. So you're assuming all communities access information the same way. You're just giving them different print to read. Clearly not enough. So as a community workers within those places, understanding your locals the most, you need to be creative, take your own decision and take your own initiative, and trust your gut and push information about human rights, about how system works, how to protect oneself, how to advocate for oneself, and how to access resources your way, the way that what's best for your community. And then, of course, there's biological and DNA endowment that we have no control over. And therefore, when we celebrate diversity, we celebrate neurodiversity, but also gender diversity, self-identification, identity, diversity, and culture and race and racism, which we're celebrating and often is also acting as a barrier against them for jobs, for accommodation, especially during COVID, right? And access to information and access to secure assets and safety measures as well, right? So when we're talking about these social determinants of health component, the first three, like I told you about, if they are unemployed or underemployed or working poor class, right? Or post-COVID, their industry has become obsolete, and therefore they are involuntarily in the need for a change of career. They would have a gap where it is an employment gap, and then they won't. And as a newcomer family, it's also usually multi-generational family with one job or two jobs sustaining the whole three generations. So with new immigrants, usually working frontline jobs and menial jobs, we understand what that means, right? If one person is low on hours or underemployed or unemployed, there is a lot of financial stress put on that family. And therefore, when there is lockdown or whatever, everybody goes under the same roof or even the same basement, having different ideologies of parenting, having different ideologies of how to play the family role. There is not only starving people, but people with unsafe living conditions and people with subpar mental health, right? So all of this is acting together, and people with different levels of education and different places where they were educated in, right? So the grandparent could have been educated in in a regime that is more totalitarian than the second generation. And the third generation going up in Canada would also have a different ideology. And therefore, nobody agrees with anybody in that household on their own rights, their own role, and how much liberty they have over, monitoring others and poking at their nose of people's privacy, cyber privacy, personal privacy, right? And then, and they may have different ideologies about financial and literacy management too, right? There are some Middle Eastern countries where people don't loan out monies, right? So the banking system does not have mortgage. You either save enough to buy your own accommodation or you not, right? And there are cultures where they go by paycheck to paycheck. And there are cultures where they try to save as much as possible, but now they're very aware that they have to go by paycheck to paycheck. And taking an hour off for a vaccine appointment or taking 3 hours off to line up for a specialist appointment for either the senior or the child may mean 2 missed meals for the families, right? So we need to know about these and help them develop their skills to not only acquire employment, but also retain meaningful and gainful employment. We need to help build financial literacy knowledge for the Canadian system, the fraud, scam, credit scores. We need to build labor knowledge where your employer cannot abuse you for the fact that you need a T4 income slips from me and employment letters from me to secure your status here. I'm going to make you do more. I'm going to pay you less, and you need to pay me back money, right? They need to know they don't need to be frauded for this, and they need to know, to stay away from scams and to stay away from unsafe working conditions, right? And they also need to have their self-efficacy skills in front of their employers, or know what legal clinic to go to, or who are the trustworthy resources that are not going to snitch at them, right? And then mentally, they need to build up the resilience and adaptation to adjust to the new life. It's no longer, the immigration newcomers from 70s and 80s where they had years to plan out their immigration. In the recent 2 or 3 years, there's a lot of involuntary displacement, right? From Syria to Afghanistan to Ukraine to Hong Kong to hopefully there are a few more pathways, right? So they didn't have enough time to plan. They might not have even been in Canada before. They might not know anybody in Canada before, and they had mere months to pack up and go. And when they left, it literally became, I had a passport and I had my pair of sneakers with me, right? So that level of support, settlement agencies now need to cover for, which is not traditionally what we do. And therefore, there are some grassroots groups where, oh, wait, they pick them up from the airport, they help them find jobs as an introduce employers, right? And they take them to vaccine appointments, they take them to legal clinics, all those things that we cannot do, but we can partner with others to do, right? And the next set of psychosocial health to do with social determinants of health is childhood experience. I spoke way too much about a history of child abuse, campus bullying, childhood trauma, families, relationships, insecurity, because people who are supposed to keep you safe and love you the most are the people who you should be trusting less, because that's where the perpetration of abuse comes in, right, or originate from, right? So, and then also changes in family structures, right? What if the sponsoring spouse is divorcing that person, right? What if they had school but were unable to finish it and had to leave because of oppression, right? What if their access to education is held hostage by someone else, right? And are they adaptable to virtual schooling and homeschooling, where it gives them even less social exposure and then even less visibility by others to determine whether, oh my God, that's a risk that I'm seeing now in the family, or a mental health risk, right? And then do we know that they have physical symptoms? Do we know how safe the physical environment is, right? I had a lot of refugee claimants or Hong Kong pathway or Ukrainian pathway users get COVID the fastest and most frequent, right? Because the modes of transportation, the crowds they get themselves into, and precarious living conditions, right, would subject them to this. And then obviously to being prey for criminals as well. And then they may not have the best social supports and the best coping skills because their families may not be with them. Their families could have been killed in the war, or their families could have had different political stance from them, and therefore huge family fights and broken away from the family, and therefore they're here by all by their lonesome, not understanding the legal system and not having trust for any authorities, right? I know time is up, so I'm gonna just zoom through it really quickly. And healthy behaviors. What are healthy behaviors, right? Canadian weather, Canadian diets, Canadian food labeling system, reporting systems are likely very different from what they had from before. Do they understand? And then if they have issues, do they have the language of expression, right? There are some cultures where it is very highly disciplined, right? It's a communal culture. When it's dining, everybody share different plates, right? It's just my own culture. It's communal culture, communal dining. And the vocabulary for emotions is very limited, right? But there's vocabulary for a lot of community aspects that are not existent in other languages versus this, right? So they may not have the wherewithal to even express their challenges. And of course, there's on top stigma. And then on top, the expectation for racial behavior because of past experience, right? And I tell you this, you're going to be racist against me, right? So all of those we've seen, and I myself even have experienced, that's going to become a barrier against their healthy habits or coping mechanisms, right? And then if they have hourly jobs, they may not have access to healthcare or precarious status, no overhead, blah, blah, blah. I had someone, a newcomer who is here on a tight timeline for Stream B Hong Kong pathway, part-time job, too new, no OHIP. She was walking on the road one day, got struck by a car, multiple rib fractures, and lo and behold, she was worried about the healthcare bill, calling us like this, with no breath support, right? Worried about the hospital bill. But okay, fortunately or not fortunately enough, during COVID, her bills are covered by OHIP with or without that. But she is stuck with not being able to go back to work and losing those hours and missing the deadline for her PR residency eligibility out of no fault of her own, right? So systemically, these are issues, right? And then there are different cultures that are not willing to abide by vaccination or infection control protocols. And there are even governmental propaganda out there that is telling you certain countries are doing this to depopulate our race, and therefore you should not take that vaccine, right? Instead, you should take this herbal meds fabricated by this official by a country that is for your own good, right? So we're combating against a lot of this. Fear, lack of trust for system, but also propagated distrust from other governments, right? So we have to be cautious of that. And gender and culture, I don't need to tell you about the LGBTQ experience, but also, don't expect that women had choice in having the kids or not, or had choice in the parenting strategies of a disabled or delayed kid or not. And often that actually also adds to a lot of family conflicts where the in-laws would be saying, my son is all good. You gave birth to such a child. It has nothing to do with me. And the child is not crazy. The child is not stupid. It's just special, blah, blah, blah. And it's a lot of shame and a lot of not taking the child outside. So the child stays home all the time, not having the right interactions, right? Again, a lot of culture has this shame, self-blame, stigma, and fear for racism that is acting against their help-seeking behavior. And then therefore, we all know about this chart, and I try to be diversified to put other text in it too. So higher the stigma, lower the help-seeking behavior. And then therefore, when they check in for services, the highest severity of problems, right? What that ends up is a higher society cost to fix the higher severity problem. And therefore, the benefits to cost ratio severely decrease. That's not what we want as providers. That's not what we want as taxpayers. That's not what we want as policy designers either. But we're talking about intersectionality, just to sum up, you see the personal need or the family needs have a lot of things going on in it, right? And think about it from the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Your oral phase, your safety phase, and your tertiary needs, right? So women and child and senior needs are very oral, right? They need to be properly clothed, sheltered, and fed, right? And then after they have all that, they worry about safety and protection. Am I going to kick out of the house if I don't pick up my grandkids on time or cook the meal on time? And then afterwards, they worry about money. Okay, so if I'm not getting kicked out, do I still have access to money to buy the medication? Right? And then if I don't, and I don't have any of that, where do I seek help? Do I have rights? What are the legal rights or access to legal services that I have? And do I have the wherewithal to express my challenges, emotional issues, or advocate for myself? Do I know the resources? Are the resources available in my language, right? And this all goes back to whether that person has the right mental and physical health, because all of these are social determinants of health. And to make it worse, it is cross-sectoral, right? So the women and children and the seniors, whatever, you have wage at the federal level, you have MCCSS, the provincial level, and likely the local shelters or local women's crisis hotline. And the federal level, it's the Ministry of Family and Children and Social Development. And it sounds like the key to intersectionality, right? Oh, sorry, no, I asked them about it and I pushed them many times about it. They still want to be stuck at the I administer childcare benefits level, right? So that's their level. Next one, housing and accommodation. It's also 3 levels. Are they talking? No, the 3 levels are not talking amongst themselves, and they're not talking to diamond number 1. And then for legal rights and safety, there is Solicitor General to punish the bad, and Attorney General to protect the victims and punish the bad. And there's local police where they encounter a lot of these non-understanding local laws and therefore get into trouble with the law. And very few of them truly want to be criminals, right? And the court system that is bound by very archaic rules, and therefore there is hardly any diversion opportunities, right? And then, they worry about money. Is Ontario Works enough? Is ODB enough? Is disability benefits enough? The thresholds are very high. It's very hard to access. Even my own clinical clients, for them to access disabilities benefits for, let's say, their behavioral, emotional, and speech language care, you actually need to break your bank 3 times to be able to access that tiny bit of tax benefit, right? And then when they need to fight for their rights, custody, divorce, I need the house back because you took it and then you kicked me out of it and you threw me down the stairs, right? Do they have access to legal clinics? And do legal clinics cover people with precarious status? And then with all of that, they are able to worry about their own mental health and physical health, but do they know where to access these services, right? It's also provincial and also local. There is public health clinics. There is the local provincial system based on, in Ontario, OHIP, but not all of these people have the status to have access to these services. And therefore, these are back to the institutional oppression that currently still exists in our system, right? We have a fragmented policy and funding system. We have restricted provider types for funding, right? If I am IRCC, I only fund you for newcomer, INO, and NNA, whatever it is, and it's only live-in caregiver, PR, convention refugee, right? So for places where NSPs are not available or other things are not available, so work permit holders, international students, and other precarious status, they don't have access to any of those newcomer support services. And outdated funding and service definitions, such as what I described, right? So there's Hong Kong pathway and there's Ukraine pathway. Ukraine pathway get access to a lot more things than Hong Kong pathway users don't. And, if we're talking about mental health, they, even at the Ontario level, and mind you, it's not covered by OHIP, we're talking about MCCSS, family trauma type mental health, right? They use the word counseling, which is very archaic. Currently, there is a College of Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario. Psychotherapy is a lot more clinical in terms of mental health illness versus counseling, which is more social supportive counseling. So what happens at the shelter is very different from what happens at the community-based mental health clinics. And the talents and the people that we hire are very different. And with everybody competing for HHR, let's just define things clearly so the right money goes to shelter counseling, the right money goes to community mental health psychotherapy, right? And another thing that none of us could overcome right now is outdated budgets leading to HHR shortage. There's HHR shortage universally, period. But our budget lines are still very outdated, not being able to catch up with the HHR shortage. And therefore, with newcomer classes not having access to equitable access to services because of their eligibility. And if we do want to serve them, we're also paying out of our own pocket for resources or working out overtime for no, additional target met. And then therefore, intra-government level, right? So is MCCSS pushing back against Ministry of Health for mental health, right? And as Solicitor General pushing against attorney generals and the courts for, should we fund the perpetrators or only the victims? And does the federal level of family service understand, at the local, provincial, and municipal levels, what family makeups are and their barriers are, instead of just talking about childcare benefits, right? Giving them bread is one meal, but you need to help them with the other stuff so that they can make bread and afford bread on their own table, right? So these are short-sightedness in immigrant development. If we are introducing close to 500,000 per year, first, we're not doing it fast enough. Second, when they're here, they don't have the easy enough conversion for licensing, right? We need doctors, we need nurses. Okay, they're here, but they cannot become doctors and nurses. Wow, what a waste of talents. What a high society cost, right? And for those who have traumatic experience, such as those from Ukraine or Hong Kong, they want to contribute to economy. They want to go back to school. They want to start working and pay taxes. But do we have a very temporary system, like say 3 to 6 months, for these people to brush up on their local career development skills, language skills, and then fix their psyche for them to be able to get jobs and retain jobs to become ongoing income tax payers, right? So what we are doing, in my humble opinion, is very short-sighted. And therefore, my recommendations would be intersectoral communication amongst all different government agencies at all levels. And the funding formula, for God's sake, all of us know here, need to be upgraded so that we can hire and retain the best people to deliver the highest quality of care. So we need to update the service definitions and immigrant type definitions to better understand whoever is coming in now versus definitions from 40 years ago. We need to be receptive or open-minded to invest short-term to develop long-term consequences, long-term benefits for our society. We need to hear from them, not ivory tower, bureaucrat, think about your own within your four walls to develop policies and funding formula, we need to listen to these users who are challenged with their applications, successful or not, or family here or not, and also listen to their caregivers for those who are delivering, what the system is trying to deliver with the gaps, and then listen to our frontline feedback. Right, there's a lot of academic research. We ourselves have done, research reports of, pathway users and whatnot. They need to listen to us and not do the ivory tower thing. And this is my personal pet peeve. People don't intentionally come to your Canada to commit a crime, right? If they know that spanking someone on their butt, spanking a child on their butt is against the law, then the grandfather won't physically discipline their child, not in public, not in private, right? There has to be pre-arrival education for anyone coming in, local laws, freedom of speech, labor laws, know your rights, what police can do and cannot do, and what obligations you have as part of the society, right? So that's what I want to talk about. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to field them. Just a recap of what we do. We are a mental health and family service agency, first and foremost. And then most of our staff are psychotherapists, and then some social workers and case workers and settlement workers, addictions workers, and disabilities workers such as me. And we have multiple locations around the GTA, York region, Peel, downtown Toronto, and Scarborough. And we serve in English, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, and Tagalog. Thank you. Questions? I successfully bored everyone to death.
Thank you so much, Anna. I think because of time, we can take 2 or 3 questions and then we can maybe wind up. There was a question in the chat, if you'll be able to share your presentation.
I don't have a question per se, but I do think that the information that you have shared is so, it's, for me, not everything is new, but the way you have exposed it and presented it is very thought-provoking, and it's a reminder of how we need to reframe services and how we need to reframe our own way of serving people. So I mean, I would love to, I'm a slow to process person. So I would love to have access to the recording, and I've been making notes as quickly as possible, but I think you have presented some very thought-provoking information that it really is quite valuable and beneficial for us to have access to.
And I apologize for not having deep enough settlement service insights to give, because I probably don't have enough experience, and all of you do, in your front line. So I try to do it in a way that is from a different level of visibility.
Okay, Yasmin and then Erika.
Hi there, Anna, that was amazing. Thank you so much. I loved it. And I took so many screenshots. I took so many notes. And I do agree that this was like, there are so many points that are thought-provoking. Thank you so much. I definitely want a copy of the slides, as do many others, as I can see in the chat. And I also wanted to ask you if you have any resources, like not for help, but so that we can read up on all of these topics. Thank you, Anna. Once again, amazing job.
I will try to see if I can find some resources.
Before we go to the next question, because people are logging off, please take a minute to do this poll, and then, yeah, or I will send it to your emails for us to finish it. So we can go to Erika for the next question.
There's a hand. Do you want to take that?
Yes. St. John?
Hi, how are you doing? Thank you first up for the wonderful presentation. I'm afraid I only came halfway through it, so we'll look back at the recording once it's done. I'm a settlement advisor. My name's Dominic Moore and I'm at the St. John Newcomers Centre. One of the issues that we have here in Atlantic Canada is a lack of resources and a lack of networking as well. So if there's any way, any system that exists across Canada that actually will help us to learn more about these sort of issues, I'd be very grateful to hear about it, or any networks that exist as well. And thank you again for the wonderful presentation.
Sorry, my name is, can I go ahead, please?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I really love your presentations today, but I'll be very happy if you can also send me a copy of your presentations so much. My name is Abdul. I'm the Settlement Advisory, which is Multicultural Consult, the Commerce Center, Mosjo, Saskatchewan. So thank you so much. So I'll be happy if you can send me a copy, please.
I'll try to package something together for a TechLab to circulate.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Ella.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to know if you have like resources or material that you suggest for training people on, like you were talking about like people's rights, but like also violence and discipline and things like that, but specific resources or material you might have or suggest for training people without alienating them or making them feel condescended to?
We adopt the trauma-based approach, right? So when we're doing language training, it is a trauma-based approach. When we're doing career counseling, it's trauma-based approach. And when we're doing settlement and mental health, certainly they're all trauma-based approach. So there are trauma-based training provided by, I think even OCASI has some, so that's good. And there are other things such as, disabilities and learning disabilities or autism. I think the PEERS model appears to be quite good. PEERS. Maybe a good one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next. Erika.
Hi, I want to thank you as well for the presentation. That was a lot of information in a short amount of time. I guess for me, I'm coming to you from Yukon, Canada, and we have obviously the same problem as the Maritime does, and that is lack of resources up here, lack of lawyers, but lots of immigrants now coming and lots of them fleeing violence and abuse. So we find that they're coming looking for lawyers mostly, and there's a lot of lawyers here that can't work cross borders. So we have no way of referring them out to various places. So any information that anybody can send would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Any person ready to go? Erika or Leon?
Hi, I just want to thank for the presentation. I think one of the things that I was thinking that I like that you talked about is when we are doing, so I've done work with women and gender-based folks in the past, and in settlement. I think I was wondering, how do you do your interventions? Because I like that you talk about that you need to look more than just housing. So if someone is coming, it needs to be sort of ingrained in the mind of a settlement worker when we're having those conversations to sort of build the relationship. We used to always say relationship is the intervention, to sort of be able to look at what other things to do. And I think in my experience, the area of human trafficking has been very complicated because there's so much fear and less, I think, places where you can connect newcomer women in particular. I come from Winnipeg, and there there is much, I think, a longer term building relationship to be able to identify. So even if you could talk a little bit more, or then share more resources when you're sharing your presentation of like how addressing those conversations to be able to identify, for example, flags around human trafficking and
Yeah,
support.
the
But I agree.
rapport built between the settlement worker and the client may be harder to build than the psych, right? Because they are pre-contemplative in terms of change. When they come to you, they don't expect to tell you I got beaten up or my child is being abused, right? They just want to come and have you solve that one problem. So without their primary needs met, they're not going to do anything more. So if you don't help them with housing, they won't tell you anything more. And frankly, they don't have the mind space or resources to think about the other needs, right? So I think, pacing with the client is very important. If that's their need, help them meet it urgently, but at the same time, use your motivational interview skills, right? There are cultures where, well, like my culture, the mom won't talk about her own abuse, but if you relate it back to the child, she'll listen to you, right? So what is the most beneficial for the development of your child, the health of your child, to have them succeed academically, right? Relate to your client from that sense, and then use that way as an in to then emotionally interview for other things. We all know about the social determinants of health. You can use those angles to see if you can wrap around certain things. And there are not many communities have all of those services together. And most service providers don't have all of those things together, right? So the network itself has to work more closely in order the service to be truly wrap around.
Okay, Samina?
First of all, I want to say it was a great presentation. And most of all, your passion on this topic, how you articulated it was amazing. But for me, as somebody else said, they are slow to grasp things. I'm one of those things. I need to slow down to grasp one idea and then the other and the other. But I would love to know if there's any possibility of the recording being available later on, because slides are one thing, but how you're explaining things, how you are showing the layers is not going to be it's not going to be reachable by just the slides. What you said was more meaningful than the slide. It just hits you, the way you were talking, and your passion, again, I'm going to say, is amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Ahmed, this may be the last question, then we may plan. Ahmed, go ahead. Okay.
Rifat?
Yes. Hello. Hi. Yes, thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation. Just going to put my video on. Yes, hello. So I am from Newcomer Women's Services. So we work with a lot of immigrant communities, and it really matches with some of the concepts that you talked about in the presentation. A lot of factors factor in. A lot of the demographics have changed in terms of immigration. They have been displaced, so a lot of different needs. And I wanted to just ask you in terms of your resources. So a lot of the clients that we work with have been from Ukraine, Afghanistan, so around mental trauma, which is also a key. So do you provide any kinds of resources or any partnerships with, because we see a lot of need with our community, with our clients having mental health support within their family, when they settled, they've been displaced. So any sort of resources or services that you provide to settlement agencies?
I will see if, the Ukraine, I think there are some in different communities where they land. So I'll try to look for them, but I probably am more familiar with the GTA where I am, right? And we take in a lot of Syria, Ukrainian refugees as well. And if they speak English, we are able to serve them.
Okay, amazing. Thank